And what I'm basically doing here is I'm writing to villain and I'm saying, "Dear sir or madam, I regret to inform you that actually I have arrived on this node with 8s or 6s and I'm now going to take all of your money if you call here. Therefore, it's very much in your best interest for you to fold. Yours faithfully, P. Clark." Ladies and gents, welcome to another piece of quality poker education here at Carrot Corner. In today's video, I'm going to show you your failings as a poker player with respect to underbluffing. I'm going to show you a few spots where you just fail to bluff, my friend. You just don't do it. You don't come up with the bluffs that your range needs to have in these key spots. I'm going to show you how you can fix this, because this is your opposition. This is them. 25 NL pool, 50 NL pool, 100 NL Zoom pool, 1-2 live, 2-5 live. That famous stream game that you appeared on last week. It's all the same. Your opponents are sheep. They don't bluff in these spots either. And today I'm going to show you how to fix this. I'm going to show you how to become the wolf and devour this competition and stop leaving this extra money on the table. Stop making yourself an unbalanced nitty poker player accidentally. We're going to find bluffs where nobody does. Let's get started. Our journey begins today with the 7-8 diamonds on the button. You can go for all three options in this spot. Call, 3-bet and fold are all completely viable and 0 EV in principle. We elect to call this time and we get a flop of King 6-8. Flops like this are a bit better than average for the pre-flop raiser. Many flops are just going to be range checks and low EV situations for the under the gun player's range, and that's because they're just going to have way more rubbish Broadway combos on low boards. But the king is such a good card for his range, he can definitely build some bets. He does bet 1/3 pot on the flop and we make the call. I think we could raise some lower down pairs like 6-5 here for a mix of value, not potential later, useful fold equity, and even getting villain to fold some better hands, but a hand like 8-7 is just too far into the middle of our range and going to play as a call only. Facing this turn bet, it's a really interesting spot, which I think a lot of people actually get wrong. The continuance strategy here for the button player in theory is what's known as call only, meaning that we don't actually build any raises into our strategy in this spot at all. That means that even if we have a hand like pocket 8s or pocket 6s, the snowmen or the coat hangers, we can just go ahead and smooth call. The reason we can do this is twofold. One, we're in position and have absolute control over whether more money goes into the pot and how much on the river. If villain checks, we bet. If he bets, we raise. And secondly, villain's range is very polarized. The reason that you don't want to fast play against the polarized range usually in position is that you just don't need to, because all of the very strong hands are going to be triple barreling at a high frequency or checking and calling a bet anyway on the next street, and you of course want to leave your opponent's air in the hand, especially when you have the nuts yourself. So raising here with a set of snowmen or coat hangers would simply blow our opponent's weaker hands out of the pot and create a situation where we're only getting value by raising from hands we could have got value from another way anyway by calling, and therefore this spot plays as call only. What this means for our range is that most of our combos of 6s or 8s that didn't raise the flop, and they won't always raise there, will actually make it to the river and still be in our range, even though we've just called twice and not raised. Villain goes ahead and bets about 3/4 pot on the river. Raising makes some sense because, as I say, we do reach this spot with 6s and 8s. In a video entitled Spots You Never Bluff, because I personally believe that you guys out there don't bluff this spot. I think 19 out of 20 of you guys underbluffs this spot, and probably 9 out of 10 of you just don't ever bluff this spot. If you're that 5 or 10% of people that does find bluffs here and even bluffs enough here, then congratulations. As this is the stream and we love to be aggro and shed blood left, right and center, we do opt to shove here and put villain into a very grueling spot. Contrary to popular advice, there's nothing inherently great about your opponent suffering. People love to say this is a great play because it puts villain in a really tough spot. How much anguish my opponent experiences is more of a bonus to me than it is actually an ingredient of the EV, and in this case the anguish is all mine as villain tanks for a while and then calls with ace king offsuit. Villain's call is meant to be one that's made at about a 75% frequency according to the solver. I actually discussed this hand with this villain in the Twitch chat, shortly after as this hand came up on stream, and this gentleman was nice enough to appear in the chat and say, hey, by the way, that was me you just played against. I decided to roll to see whether I would call, and I rolled a low number, so I called this time, but I was going to fold half the time there. I said that feels reasonable. I don't know what the exact call frequency for your hand is, but that seems good. And Villain then informed me that if this had been anybody else, if this had been a player that he didn't know was a studied regular, he would have simply always folded. There are lots of opponents in your own pools playing this way who are just snap folding this hand to a raise because they simply don't expect to get bluffed here. How often would you expect to get bluffed here by somebody who is not either a strong player, cheater, solver, or robot? There are way more people out there in your pool who are just expecting to run into an underbluffed range here and are folding hands like ace king a lot compared with people who are just stationing. However, there will be weaker players who just never fold a hand like ace king here, and if you have a reputation like I do for loving to throw chips around, you will get looked up in these spots once every so often. But this is a very cool spot to bluff in. This next spot I feel is another very underbluffed spot, but this time from our opponent's point of view. We go ahead and open ace queen offsuit on the button, face this check raise on king 10-10. We have the backdoor queen high flush draw here. Really bog standard call, not much else to say, not building a 3-bet range in this spot. So Villain does go ahead and bet 1/3 pot on the turn. This is quite a nice way for Villain's bluffs to play in a node like this, as well as their value hands. They just have a lot of mergy hands now, like trip 10s, king x, etc. Yes, they have some flushes too, but so do we. So this is the sort of card that actually makes Villain's range a bit less nutty in the value region than it was before, because it allows us to catch up with all of the flush draws that we had on the flop that we're going to be basically bet calling at an incredibly high frequency. So this is a card that Villain does want to go small and bet quite often on. It's a good card for Villain's range, but not so good for the nutted region, or formally nutted region of Villain's range on the flop, which is 10x. And so Villain goes small with a pretty high frequency. This makes sense. We want to go ahead and call again here. So we call and onto the 3 of clubs river. Now Villain makes a play that I think is very underbluffed. I think when people triple barrel you for a very small bet size, what they're basically doing is polarizing earlier on in the hand, and then they're actually condensing their range a little bit. They're kind of saying, actually what I'm repping here for value is just like a 10 with a not so good kicker and no diamond blocker. This is not a sizing that Villain is going to use with a flush very often, nor a full house, nor any kind of really good 10. Especially not with a diamond, and so I expect this to just be thin value bets like 10x most of the time. The reason I think this is very underbluffed is that it's actually super counterintuitive to get here with a hand like queen jack and just go for 2 small bets after check raising the flop. The very best players will be bluffing enough with this line, but it's deeply counterintuitive for the average reg. If in your games you see a regular take a line like big bet, small bet, or big bet, small bet, the chances are that this is a bluff a very negligible amount of the time, and that you should just overfold your range. Our only real choices with this hand, I believe, are raise or fold, and I elect not to raise because it doesn't really make sense to bluff raise in a spot where I think my opponent's likely to be under bluffing. And secondly, it's me, and I always get looked up because people just never believe me. Anyway, an underbluff spot, one we should be overfolding. How do you bluff enough in this spot? How do you get around this imbalance issue that pool succumbs to here? Well, you just have to remember that you do have a lot of value bets that arrive on that river that are only good enough to bet 3rd pot, so you have to throw your bluffs in there sometimes as well. It's not okay to just try to maximize your fold equity, because getting more fold equity when you pay more for it isn't actually a good thing. Just as me going out and buying the most expensive car in the car dealership isn't necessarily the best thing for me to do, even if it would get me the best car. Bluffing the biggest size imaginable isn't the best thing to do just because it would get you the most fold equity. It's the same thing. Onto another spot. This next spot is possibly one of the most underbluffed situations in the entire game tree. We go ahead and 3-bet the queen 10 of clubs, small blind versus cutoff, and in position makes the call. On ace 9-5, we elect to adopt the very common strategy of just betting range small. We can do this in situations that are highly favourable for range, especially where Villain's range is somewhat polarised by the flop texture. The reason that Villain is fairly polarised here is that when he has pocket 9s, pocket 5s, or an ace, he'll have an incredibly high equity / EV hand, whereas when he has something like an underpair or 2 broadways, he's going to have a really bad hand. In these situations, you don't really want to go big, but due to your range doing well, you do want to bet often. All of this is covered, range advantage and nut advantage, in the Carrot Poker School Grade 1 Lecture 6. Villain has a think and makes the call, and we get the Jack of Hearts turn. This is one of the most exceedingly high EV cards for a range that you could imagine, because while a lot of our 3-bet range pre-flop was 2 broadways, many of which were Jack X, Villain actually 4-bet or folded most of his Jack-X combos pre, and then proceeded to fold all of the remaining ones unless they're clubs on the flop, apart from maybe some backdoor diamond combos, but these are really dicey on an ace-high board. So Villain's range is pretty devoid of Jack-X here. It's going to have a lot more combos relative to ours of things like pocket 10s in it, and our range is going to be doing really well here. There's not a lot of air left after the board starts running out this way, and whenever your range is already fairly short of air, it means that you should have a very high bet frequency, and I wouldn't be shocked if the global bet frequency for our range was somewhere around 70% on this turn card for a big sizing, and therefore we do want to bet pretty often. As our hand is a super implied odds mega draw, there's no problem just betting this one all the time, and we don't really have to fear being raised here because theoretically the in position player is not meant to be fast playing much on an already high static kind of board in position. There's just no urgency to be jamming a lot here in this spot. So the good news is that even when we face a continue here, we're way more likely to face a call than we are a raise, and call is indeed the line that Villain picks. On the river, I didn't really feel content with just making a straight or just making a flush, so I elected to make both. The King of Clubs is another card that really just starts to eliminate the air combos from my range. I do like to take my time in spots like this because if I were bluffing, I would need to think about it a little bit. But let's ask ourselves on that note, what exactly do you think I would have to have here to be bluffing? What are my natural bluffs? Pause the video and have a think about it. Assuming you've done that, you've probably drawn a bit of a blank. Maybe you're a bit more of a studied player and you're already aware that the small blind needs to be barreling turn on such a favourable card with many underpair related bluffs such as 6s, 7s and of course the snowmen. If you're firing the snowmen on this turn, you'll have no difficulty getting to the river with pocket 8s, but even then you have to be willing to just fire off here at a very high frequency in order to avoid underbluffing. Because your range is drowning in so many combos like straights and flushes, sets and 2-pair, you're going to have to bluff these underpair combos and anything like that at a high frequency. What you mustn't do here is pretend that you ever have 2 random unpaired cards here that you can bluff with, because you simply don't play hands like the Queen 7 of Spades on this node. So Villain has a little tank himself here. This is on 2x speed, so he's already been thinking for about 10 seconds as I'm speaking here. Another 10 seconds whiz past, and eventually Villain decides it's characters. I can't fold against this maniac. He's always doing stupid stuff on stream and shouting about it. I'm gonna call. The call with Ace King is probably a hand the solver will always call with, I would imagine, and I think the reason the solver always makes a call like this, I haven't looked at it, but I'd imagine it's just because this is actually a value chopper and we can jam Ace King ourselves. I'm not sure we can jam anything worse than Ace King here for value. I suspect not, just given the high amount of range filtering that's taken place and how strong both ranges are by this point. So I think Ace King is going to be a call because it beats all bluffs in theory and also chops with some value hands. You typically don't want to fold hands that can beat or chop with value hands as well as beating all bluffs. In practice, I'm not so sure that the call with Ace King is going to be a great thing, and the reason for that is that the small blind on this node in reality, especially in games that some of you guys will be playing, like 2-5 Live or 25 NL, it's just going to be a practically unbluffed node. There will be many humans, in fact, in these spots that effectively just never ever bluff. Let's have a look at another spot. Picking up the pocket inverted coat hangers in the small blind is always a pretty cool thing to do. I'd like you guys to promise me that the next time you're in the card room, you're going to just casually say, so I had the inverted coat hangers in the small blind, and see what people say. Can you do that for me? If you do, go in the comments below and let me know what happened. Let me know how it went down. We go ahead and 4-bet here to 24.5 big blinds, which is a great way just to say, I want to stack off. I don't want to think about it anymore. It's too painful to play 3-bet or 4-bet pots out of position. Don't make me do it. But Villain decides he'll call and force us to play a flop anyway. This is a disgusting flop. It's such a bad flop that we elect to check everything. Yes, I know we have a set here. We think about our range before we think about our hand. We want to slot that hand in at the end after we've considered what's going on range versus range. Since range versus range, this is a very bad situation to be in, we need to be checking at quite a high frequency. The reason this is a bad situation to be in is because we have 3 so-called danger cards on this flop. When you 4-bet pre, you naturally begin to skew your range towards very big cards. Your opponent, on the other hand, will have a monopoly on the cards between about 8 and Jack in this situation, and therefore boards like 10-9-8, 10-9-7, 9-8-7, 8-7-6 in 4-bet pots tend to favour the caller of the 4-bet. Therefore, we'll start by checking everything. That doesn't mean we're going to go into our shell and never stack off or try and fold with pocket kings here. It just means that we begin passively because our range just simply cannot support a lot of betting. Villain does decide to stab here because why not? Pool just bets when check to, right? Just a very natural thing to do. Sizing makes sense because this player will want to bet a lot of thin value hands for value and denial of equity in this spot, and will not want to build a super polarized betting range, and we have a fairly easy jam. When we have nines, we don't need to discuss this spot very much. It's very clear that our hand probably just wants the fast play on this node, given that Villain has a ton of mergy hands, and letting them see the turn and the river here with this strong a value shove just seems a bit wrong. I'm not one to overvalue protection, guys, but this is a spot where I value urgency of getting paid, basically. The urgency of getting money into the pot with this hand and not allowing just like checks and then a bunch of runouts that kill my action, etc. I don't know if this is a pure jam, but I think it probably is. But the most important aspect of this hand is going to be what my bluffs should actually be here in theory. If you're sitting there thinking, yeah, my bluffs would be king, queen of clubs, think again. King, queen of clubs is not a bluff. It has about 54% equity against the random value bet in Villain's range, and is doing much better than that overall. To describe that hand as a bluff and then throw value hands in to balance it is actually just going to be to build a very, very strong shoving range indeed, one that does not even come close to making your opponent indifferent if he's here with a hand like king 10. What we actually want here is for king 10 to be close to break even. We're usually trying to make the middle of our opponent's value range break even when they bet, and this spot is no different. Therefore, in order to avoid the classic trap of underbluffing these situations, what we actually have to do is start jamming here with some hands like king jack, some hands like king queen, ace 8, maybe even some weird hand like ace king of hearts is a jam here. I don't know, maybe not. That's probably too far, but if you look this one up in a solver, let me know down in the comments what sort of hands are bluff jamming. I guarantee you some of them will blow your mind. Another very underbluffed spot. We jam, Villain snaps aces. This is a slow play gone wrong. There's nothing wrong with it pre-flop though. Again, the theme comes up time and time again in this video that in position against the polarized range, you just don't have to fast play. With kings, with queens, with ace king offsuit, you want to jam here, but with aces, a totally invincible hand, well, so he thought, you want to be doing more slow playing, and there's nothing wrong with this line. Yes, it got him stacked on that occasion, but you can't judge a play in poker by its results on one branch of the tree. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. I do hope it's opened your mind to a few more spots in which you can be more aggressive, especially where people in your pool just don't expect it from you. You can really surprise a lot of people who are just playing against global population by taking aggressive lines with hands that seem unorthodox and unfamiliar, but actually make a lot of sense as bluffs when you think about it. This has been Pete Clark for carrotcorner.com. If you like the way I talk about the game and the way we teach here, do check out carrotcorner.com and have a look at our store for all of our poker courses, solved ranges, and even our exploitative e-magazine Pio versus Population that will help you boost your win rate instantly just by reading through a nicely written series of articles. See you next time at Carrot Corner Poker Education for another educational video. All the best. Please do like and subscribe and let me know what you think down below. See you next time, guys. Bye for now.